So at the time of the lunch buffet, we would ask you to help us by, you can see that there's tables but no seats. So if you want to, you can eat at your seats here, but you can also move your chairs to some of these tables to have lunch, and then move them back for the afternoon proceedings. And then at the end of the day, we're going to have what's called a apericena, so a reception like last night, but with a little bit more food offering. So if you want to make a dinner out of it, you can. But if you also just want to have some snacks and then on your own go out to dinner in town, you're able to as well. Because we need to close the building at around 8 p.m., so the reception will go from the conclusion of the conference, 5:30, 6 o'clock, to about 7:30. And at some point, we're going to start to look at you with mean faces, because we'll need you to move out and enjoy the town of Florence as we clean up the facility and get it closed and ready for normal operation. So thank you again for coming. You're welcome in our space. You're welcome in our building. My colleague Elizabeth back there, who deserves a round of applause because she's done a lot of organization. I say that to butter her up because I'm about to say also, if you need anything, ask her. She's here to help us with the smooth operation of today's conference. My colleague who deserves a round of applause, Guido Gabelli, who's sitting here at this tech table, is actually not a professional tech person, but he's becoming one because we keep relying. He just has a natural ability with tech and he knows this stuff. He's one of our student development support persons. He works with students, events, faculty, putting stuff together. And he's also doing our tech support today. He's done a fantastic job. So for those of you who have presentations you need to get with him, he's here to help, and we'll do our best to make this a smooth experience for the speakers and for the students. So with that, I'd like to call up my colleague and friend, Dr. Upendra Acharya, who is going to give us an introduction to the theme of the conference today. So Upendra.
Again, welcome to the 10th edition of the International Human Rights Law Conference, Gonzaga University School of Law, Gonzaga in Florence, the Special Human Rights Interest Group of Asian Society of International Law, Center for Civil and Human Rights, and Global Legal Education Program of the Gonzaga School of Law. And welcome again. We are honored to have distinguished speakers and attendees here and the participants. We had keynote speaker last night, wonderful presentation, in a very light mood, very heavy content we got about the executive aggrandizement and almost a kind of state lawlessness when it gets to the equality and human lives, human dignity and worth based on discrimination. That was the great presentation of that last night. And thanks to Fred Cournot, who did a wonderful job yesterday. And we have another keynote speaker today, this afternoon after the lunch, Professor Marisha Sol. She will be our keynote speaker. And all our distinguished speakers in 3 different panels. And all the students, you guys are amazing. And the volunteers, I particularly want to thank you, the volunteers that we have been helping. Everybody has helped, but volunteers who have taken that responsibility to help the conference, going operation of this conference very smooth, and being ambassadors to the speakers, and the registration aspects, and in the check to the Guido. And thank you, Elisabetta and Guido, for things, and all the students. Welcome and thank you very much. And our Dean, Jacob Rooksby, thank you very much for all the support that you have been doing, supporting this thing since you have become the Dean, and we have grown a lot after that. So thank you very much, all the distinguished speakers, and everybody will be introduced in the respective panels, and you know all the introductions here in the book, all the speakers, moderators, everybody's introduction is the book. That is why we do this way. And now we come up with a theme every year. This is human rights focused conference, but every year we change the theme. So we had one time Black Lives Matter. That was the theme. So every year we change the theme. We had climate change and human rights. We had cultural heritage and human rights. We had AI and human rights. We have different themes that every year we do that, change the theme, but always human rights focus. This has been the signature focus and signature program of all these Gonzaga in Florence and Gonzaga University School of Law conference. This year, we came up with 3 or 4 options what kind of theme we should be doing. And then we talked, and Dean Rooksby, Professor Rooksby, and I myself, we went through, we brainstormed what is the exact thing we want to do, and we came up with this theme, executive aggrandizement and the decline of rule of law and democracy from human rights perspective. So that was the theme we decided. And given the context of the United States of America and the executive aggrandizement is not as extreme as we have witnessed and experienced now. It's not that it was not that before. The unitary executive theory was always in place. Justice Scalia was always the advocate of unitary executive theory. So the unitary executive theory, but still we had some constitutional and legal inertia to that, and to maintain all 3 branches of the government somehow were maintaining some sort of inertia and maintaining to the executive aggrandizement and maintaining the separation of power. But now all of a sudden it took an absolutist executive aggrandizement context in the United States, and it became more than separation of power, it became consolidation of power in one hand, in one branch of the government. And it is not only in the United States. We take United States of America's example, not because we are Americans, and either we are in Italy or America. United States Constitution and United States government's policies are discussed everywhere in the world because of the influence that the United States of America and the government and the country puts that to the world, presents that to the world. It's always the topic of the talk. So United States is, its policy is. And that is why we thought that it is not only the United States, in many countries, there are executive aggrandizement taking place in everywhere. It's so contagious. In developing countries, though practicing democratically elected governments, the executive aggrandizement and authoritarian model of the governance and state lawlessness is rampant in developing countries, most of the places. So it is contagious. So we thought that the United States government now has given us a great excuse to come up with this theme to deal with the world's problem, the state lawlessness, the absence of rule of law, the pretension of democracy. That is the situations everywhere now. Everywhere, either in Europe, Europeans they claim, European governments and European citizens and scholars, they claim that they are the persons who are beholding the rule of law, international rule of law. But when it comes to the government executive aggrandizement and policy matters and compliance and implementation of international rule of law and their own interest, it is undermined. And you can take that example from Ukraine war and other examples in the past, from Kosovo to Balkan countries, etc. And it is part because the executive aggrandizement, because other legislative and judicial aspects are undermined in those decision makings. That is the main cause. The Europeans are not exceptions either. Asia, of course, always taking pride of culture, but always missing in the rule of law spirit. Asian scholars, I see that whether in the United States or in Asia, they take that unnecessary carriers and heavy burden of cultural pride and prejudiced scholarly context. They have to get out of that. That is there too. And those kind of mentalities give the support and boost and grant the executive aggrandizement everywhere. We have known that from torture memo in the United States to now everything. Now there are law firms, judiciary. The current president of the United States of America, the way he has been handling everything, consolidating power, and then governing the country with an attitude that like a king. And the other branches of the government, the judiciary and the legislative branch, the Congress, are not performing their functions as they should be. And now I would like to read one quote from President Trump here, what he said, and then I want to make this. So he says that, so I am the one, whatever I want, I would like to rule that way because people have elected me for that. And nobody is going to oppose me, and they will have consequences if they oppose me. This is the thing that he says that. How can we say that? And democracy, and as we all know that in constitutional law and legal context, democracy and rule of law, they are very anomalical in a sense that majority rules in democracy, but in rule of law, the legal spirit and the protection of rights of individuals and minorities are protected through judiciary, through the constitutional and legal principles. However, those two things are anomalical, because only democracy is not a perfect thing if there is no rule of law. So that is the part that American Constitution has been taken as an example all over the world, as the good example of separation of powers and checks and balances. You know, I have taught in different countries, and I have studied law in different countries, including the United States, Nepal, India, and in the United States. That is what I was taught. That's what I have been teaching. Now, it is very difficult to teach that anymore. So, very unfortunate. And that is another thing is that now the Congress is not taking its responsibility in checking the presidential power in Congress. Unprecedented tariff rules, and the Constitution is very clear under the Commerce Clause, the interstate commerce, tribal commerce, and foreign commerce. That's Congress's duty. Unprecedented. It is not like one custom officer is reviewing the things and adding few more dollars on the customs that might not match the harmonized tariff schedule. It's not like that. It is unprecedented tariff things. And at what cost? At the cost of economy of the United States of America and American people. During the 30s, the depression, economic depression. Exactly, this is the same policy we are revisiting now. The tariff and made in America. That didn't help in 30s. Now we are doing the same thing. So Congress is not doing its job. Another thing, judiciary. Court is the main thing that upholds the rule of law, irrespective of the democracy and supermajority ruling. And the court says that if president is president is acting while he is in presidential position, and that act is criminal, he gets the immunity for criminal action. Trump versus United States. Is that rule of law or rule of person? How can anybody who holds executive power gets immunity from any kind of criminal action? That is the Supreme Court we have. And there is a unitary executive authority. All these independent agencies, Hayes, Federal Reserves, the SELA LLC case, Wilcox case, all these things, 24, 25 decisions of the Supreme Court, that those people can be removed by will of those independent agencies' heads. How can that be? Never happened that in the history of the Supreme Court since Humphrey. So those are the things that neither judiciary is acting very well, not Congress is acting very well, and the authoritarian and dictatorial mindset of the elected head of the country is acting in an arbitrary and capricious way without reasoning. And that is the problem we have. And in the rest of the world, in Europe, it has its own problem. In other countries, the judiciary is not very independent. Congress is sold and bought for the votings in the parliament to support the executive policies. Those are the things happening everywhere all over the world. So we are now, that's what is happening is that has ultimately impacted on the human lives, dignity, and worth of the peoples around the world, the citizens around the world, wherever they live. That is why Professor Rooksby and I, we thought that the executive aggrandizement and the decline of rule of law and democracy from human rights perspective, that is the great theme that we can do. So we did that. We thank you very much, Professor Rooksby, for coming up to this theme. I just wanted to give the why we took this theme in this context, and that is so appropriate. That's what I wanted to justify you, that otherwise the attending this conference would not have value. So that is why I wanted to say this thing. Now, there are lots of international context on executive aggrandizement of powerful countries that I will talk about that when on a panel, the last panel, a little bit about that. And saving that, again, welcome everyone, the distinguished scholars, all the faculty members, professors of the Gonzaga University School of Law, Dean Jason Houston. Without his support, I have been saying every time, and he's such a great intellectual mind with a very sound professional and academic administrative quality. Jason, thank you very much. And all the students, you are amazing. You guys are great. You know, we have different sets of students every year, and this year I'm already, with this week of our interactions, I'm feeling so much energy, positive aura and energy from you guys. And I hear the same thing from all the faculty members, my colleagues here. Thank you very much, guys. And then now I would like to introduce, there is no introduction is needed for Professor Rooksby. He is, again, I mean, he has always surprised me with his depth of intellectuality, academic analysis, and critical approach to everything. You know, I come from Nepal. I have a tendency of naturally thinking that I have the critical thinking, and because of my cultural bringing and surviving in the United States of America, a country of white people, always racial discrimination was rampant underneath in a normative way, even though it is not legal now anymore. That is how I thought always. And Professor Rooksby has surprisingly always beaten me that how critical he has been always in every aspect. So I thank you very much. That's a great thing. So though he's dean, I always like to call him as Professor Rooksby because of his sound academic and intellectual soundness and depth. So Professor Rooksby. But I want to do one thing. I want to suggest to the audience one thing about, you can read the whole thing, but I have read his one book and I was stunned by that book. That I want to do this is this in 2016 publication, and when he became dean, and he said that, you know, if you would like to read, I would like to give this book to you if you have time. And I said, I read that book. I'm very impressed with that. And that is how I thought, how critical mind he is. And then he has, and then how, whenever we discussed in different way, not dean, faculty kind of thing, but academic faculty members conversation, always that critical mind that I have found, and I have evidenced that, witnessed that. Thank you. And this is the book, The Branding of the American Mind, How Universities Capture, Manage, and Monetize Intellectual Property and Why It Matters. There are lots of other books he has edited and written, lots of articles, but that is the book first time I read, I was very much impressed. So I would like to welcome Professor Rooksby to talk about the theme, to give special remarks on the theme. Professor Rooksby, Dean Rooksby.
Thank you for that very generous and warm introduction, my colleague and friend, Professor Acharya. I'm going to sit down because I have some more lengthy remarks. I hope I live up to the billing. Thank you for mentioning my book. It's available at fine booksellers everywhere. If you get your copy, I'll be happy to sign it. Okay, perfect. I got it now. For those of you watching online, hello. Welcome to the 2026 Gonzaga University School of Law Human Rights Conference, sponsored by our Center for Civil and Human Rights, Gonzaga in Florence, and the Human Rights Interest Group of the Asian Society of International Law. As mentioned, our theme this year is executive aggrandizement and decline of rule of law and democracy, human rights perspectives. And once again, Florence provides a remarkably fitting backdrop for our conversations. When people think of Florence, I think they often first think of beauty. They think of Michelangelo, Botticelli, Dante. They think of art, architecture, and the Renaissance. I majored in political science in college, and so I hope Florence, people think of it also for its long and complicated political history. It is a city associated not only with beauty, but with power. Concentrated power, contested power, inherited power, commercial power, ecclesiastical power, and political power. The history of Florence reminds us that human flourishing and human vulnerability often exist side by side. Indeed, perhaps no Florentine thinker better captured this tension than Niccolò Machiavelli, most famously author of The Prince, as students in my leadership class now know. Machiavelli is often remembered simplistically as someone who celebrated ruthless leadership. It is better to be feared than loved, and better still, to not be hated. Yet that reading is incomplete. He was also a deeply disappointed civil servant who worried about instability, factionalism, institutional weakness, and the fragility of self-government. He lived through political upheaval and exile. He understood that republics do not sustain themselves automatically. They decay. They drift. they become vulnerable to the concentration of power in individuals who promise order, efficiency, security, or national renewal. And those concerns actually feel remarkably contemporary. Across the globe today, democratic institutions appear far more fragile than many people expected 20, 30, even 40 years ago. In the years following the Cold War, Francis Fukuyama famously suggested we may be witnessing the, quote, end of history. Not the end of events, of course, but the end of ideological competition, with liberal democracy emerging as humanity's final and enduring form of political organization. At the time, many believed liberal democracy had not only prevailed, but would continue expanding and deepening across the globe. Yet the past several decades have complicated that optimism. We live in a moment in which elections continue to occur, constitutions remain formally in place, and courts continue to exist, while many observers nonetheless perceive erosion in the norms, practices, and institutional guardrails that sustain liberal democracy and the rule of law. Importantly, this erosion rarely announces itself dramatically, at least at first. Rather, democratic decline is often incremental. It may begin with attacks on the legitimacy of courts, journalists, universities, or elections themselves. It may appear in the language leaders use about political opponents, minorities, migrants, or dissenters. It may emerge through emergency powers that become normalized, through bureaucratic restructuring, through loyalty tests, through the weakening of civil society institutions, or through public exhaustion and cynicism. And perhaps most importantly, it often occurs with public support. That last point is uncomfortable, especially for lawyers and academics who tend to imagine threats to democracy as obvious and external. But history suggests something more complicated. Democracies do not usually collapse only because bad actors seize power. They also weaken when citizens lose confidence that democratic institutions are capable of solving problems, producing stability, or treating people fairly. That reality makes this conference theme especially important because it asks us to think not only about governments and leaders, but also about institutions, incentives, culture, economics, fear, identity, and human dignity. I should confess at the outset that I approach this subject not as a specialist in comparative constitutional law or international human rights, but as someone who has spent much of my professional life thinking about institutions, how they gain legitimacy and reputation, how they lose legitimacy and reputation, how they exercise authority, and how human beings respond to power structures within and around them. Universities, in many respects, are ideal places to explore these questions because universities themselves are institutional experiments built around competing values. Universities seek continuity, yet also innovation. They seek order, yes, yet also dissent. They transmit inherited knowledge, yet encourage people to challenge inherited assumptions. And importantly, universities depend upon norms that are often invisible until they weaken. Norms of academic freedom, procedural fairness, shared governance, open inquiry, tolerance of disagreement, and respect for expertise. Once those norms deteriorate, rebuilding them is difficult. Law operates similarly. The rule of law depends not only upon written rules, but upon cultural commitments. Constitutions alone do not preserve democracies. Courts alone do not preserve democracies. Elections alone do not preserve democracies. Ultimately, democratic systems require people who are willing to lose arguments, lose elections, accept institutional constraints, and continue participating in civic life anyway. That is a profoundly human challenge, and it is why human rights perspectives are so important to this discussion. When executive power expands unchecked, the harms are rarely distributed evenly. The burdens often fall hardest and first on vulnerable populations, political dissidents, racial or ethnic minorities, migrants, religious minorities, indigenous communities, journalists, academics, and those lacking economic or political power. One of the striking features of our conference program is its genuinely global perspective. We will hear discussions today touching on India, Vietnam, the United States, climate policy, voting rights, constitutional transformation, migration, and corporate complicity in democratic backsliding. That breadth matters because democratic erosion does not manifest identically across nations or political systems. And yet certain patterns seem to recur. Power centralizes. Accountability weakens. Critics become enemies. Complexity becomes inconvenient. Independent institutions are portrayed as obstacles rather than safeguards. And eventually, law risks becoming less a restraint upon power than an instrument of power. One of the questions I find myself wrestling with is whether modern societies have become especially vulnerable to these dynamics because of speed. Democracy is slow. Constitutionalism is slow. Deliberation is slow. Courts are slow. And yes, I can attest, universities are very slow. Human rights work is often painfully slow. But modern political culture increasingly rewards immediacy, outrage, certainty, and spectacle. Social media accelerates emotion faster than reflection. Political leaders are rewarded for domination rather than persuasion. Public patience for complexity has diminished. It is perhaps unsurprising that, over the latter decades of the 20th century, the average political soundbite on American television news reportedly shrank from more than 40 seconds to fewer than 10. We simply don't have the time or the attention spans that we once did. In such an environment, executive aggrandizement can begin to look attractive, not only to leaders, but to citizens frustrated with friction itself. Yet friction in constitutional democracies is often the point. Checks and balances are frustrating by design. Procedural protections are inefficient by design. Independent courts are inconvenient by design. Rights protections frequently prevent governments from acting with maximum speed or force precisely because history teaches us that concentrated power, even when initially popular, often carries profound risks. Florence, yet again, offers an instructive reminder. The Renaissance was not merely an explosion of artistic talent. It reflected renewed confidence in human reason, human inquiry, and human potential. It reflected the belief that individuals possess dignity and moral worth, independent of rulers or political systems. That intellectual inheritance helped shape modern conceptions of liberty, rights, constitutionalism, and democratic self-government. But the Renaissance also reminds us that progress is neither linear nor permanent. Cultures advance and they retreat. Institutions strengthen and they can decay. Rights expand and contrast. History does not move quickly or inevitably toward justice, despite our greatest hopes. Which is why conferences like this one matter. Gatherings such as ours are, in some respects, acts of optimism. They reflect a belief that serious people of different ages and from different nations, disciplines, backgrounds, and perspectives can still come together to think carefully about difficult questions. They reflect confidence that dialogue matters, scholarship matters, law matters, and human dignity matters. That confidence is worth preserving. Before closing, I want to acknowledge how honored we are to welcome such an accomplished and international group of scholars and speakers to Florence this year. I'm especially pleased that Professor Marissa Jackson-So of the University of Richmond School of Law will deliver today's keynote address. As someone preparing soon to join the Richmond community, I could not be more excited to hear her insights on these issues. particularly her work examining systemic human rights violations and the reconstruction of democratic power through legal reform. In closing, I return to Florence, this most special city. One of the remarkable things about this city is that it constantly reminds visitors that human beings are capable of extraordinary things. Extraordinary creativity, extraordinary beauty, extraordinary ambition. But history also reminds us that human beings are capable of extraordinary overreach. The challenge before democratic societies, then, is not merely how to empower governments to act, but how to ensure that power remains accountable to law, restrained by institutions, respectful of dissent, and anchored in human dignity. That is easier said than done, but it is work worth doing. And there are few better places in the world to begin that conversation than in Florence. Thank you, welcome, and please enjoy the conference.
Thank you very much, Dean Rooksby. That was fantastic. I really appreciate you giving another reason to this group of why we're here in Florence. There are so many reasons. One I've highlighted, and the reference is back to Machiavelli, and the sophisticated understanding you shared with this group about Machiavelli resonates well and really does set us up for a great day of conversation. So as your schedules say, we're going to have a little break, about 15 minutes. Use it to gather more energy, use the restrooms. We'll be back in, and I'll call us back in about, I'll call us back in 10 minutes, giving you a 5-minute warning, and then we'll have our first panel. So.
Is everything here or is anything inside the building?
Everything, well, the whole, all the panels are here, inside the building. You can use the restrooms and use this resource, but all the events will be back here. So back here in 15 minutes, everyone.